grab this for you.
Okay. Here. Oops. You all right?
Yep. Okay. Yeah,
Do you know my friend Jim Cramon? He's with.
Cramon and Gray?
Yeah.
Yes.
He and I went to GW Law School. He was a very close friend for years. I know he's had some medical problems.
Right.
Do you ever see him?
He's much closer to my father-in-law, Joe Conn,
Yeah.
than he is.
Wonderful guy.
Yeah, he is a good man.
Yeah. Okay, let's get started. Thank you all for coming. I'm Dan Glickman, the director here at the IOP.
It was delightful.
And this is what I call where the rubber hits the road forum. We have a lot of discussions about abstract issues, all very important, some in the international arena, some in the domestic arena. But this is a chance to see where people who have to interface with the daily problems in most folks' lives occur on a daily basis, how those decisions are made. And tonight's forum is part of our new members forum, and I want to quickly introduce the members that are here in addition to those on the panel. We co-sponsor this with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Their executive director, Tom Cochran, is somewhere in this audience, I think. Back here, okay. Anyway, it's a pleasure to have you here. I would just like to introduce the mayors quickly, ask them to stand. I hope I pronounced their names right. And then we'll see who's actually here, and hold your applause if possible. Vicki Barnett, Farmington Hills, Michigan. Kevin Burke, Terre Haute, Indiana. John Callahan, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. David Cicilline from Providence, Rhode Island.
Had to go.
Had to go, okay. Joseph Curtatone from Somerville, Massachusetts. Jack Ingebretson, Livonia, Michigan. Bill Ewell, Alexandria, Virginia. Lois Frankel, West Palm Beach, Florida. Bill Haslam, Knoxville, Tennessee. John Hickenlooper, Denver, Colorado. Are you in charge of this? What?
It's a Denver thing.
Kathy Culker-Wheeler from Renton, Washington. John Marks from Tallahassee, Florida. Now we can clap. Carlos Mayans, is Carlos here? There he is right here. Wichita, Kansas, very important city, okay. Jeanette McCarthy, Waltham, Massachusetts. John Payton, Jacksonville, Florida. Charles Ryan, Springfield, Massachusetts. 34 grandchildren this man and his wife have, okay? Yeah, right. That's right, you had nothing to do with this, right? 11 children, as I recall. Yeah. And is Yvonne Scarlett Golden here yet from Daytona Beach, Florida? She's expected and hasn't arrived yet. Anyway, let's give them all a hand, these folks. They have... We have 3 mayors in person and 1 via video conference from the great city of Cleveland, Ohio, that can tell us what it's like to be on the front lines of governing on a day-to-day basis. Mayors are the ones that people look to for leadership in times of crises, floods, fire, earthquakes. They're the ones that deal with the things when people get to work, whether the street lights work, whether the city police is there doing their job, whether the fire departments are properly funded. And, you know, really where most people get their idea about what government is and how government functions is through the mayors of this great country of ours. So we're lucky to have 3 great ones here and 1 other great one on teleconferencing in addition to the great ones that I introduced. Let me start quickly. On my left is Martin O'Malley of Baltimore, Maryland. Prior to his election as mayor, our guest was on the Baltimore City Council for 8 years in the 1990s and was an assistant state's attorney for the city of Baltimore before that. He was elected at the age of 36 with 91% of the vote as mayor of a great city, Baltimore, Maryland, becoming the youngest big city mayor in all of this great country of ours. So any people in this room who think it's not possible to get elected to office as a kid, he proves that that was wrong. And you know,
aging rapidly.
Aging rapidly. You still have your hair, though.
Today.
In any event, Baltimore has achieved national recognition in a lot of areas of governance, from economic development to education, to public safety. He's a graduate of Catholic University and the University of Maryland Law School. And he is remembered here. He came here a few years ago to do a demonstration of CityStat, which I think he did today as well. Our next guest is the gentleman on the end here, Wellington Webb. Got his start in public service on sage advice from a very wise woman, and that was when he was working as a forklift operator, when he sought advice from his grandmother, Helen Campbell. And I guess she, told you that if you didn't like what was going on to go run for office?
Told me go see the mayor.
Go see the mayor, okay. He went to the city hall, was offered a job, and she taught him political involvement. He got into the Colorado House of Representatives. He was selected by President Carter to serve as regional director of the U.S. Department of Health and Education and Welfare. He was elected Denver City Auditor in 1987, and then a mayor in 1991, where he served 3 terms as mayor, focusing on parks and open space, public safety, economic development, and children. He is the past president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and National Conference of Black Mayors. Our third guest is, and by the way, Wellington is a fellow here at the IOP this year. Our third guest is from Alaska, from the great state of Alaska, spent 30 years in public service, most recently as Lieutenant Governor of Alaska for 8 years in the year 2002, where she tried unsuccessfully to become the next governor of Alaska, but I suspect this will not be the end of her political career. She was mayor of Juneau. She was a member of the State House of Representatives, and she is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, both undergraduate and the University of Wisconsin Law School. Our final guest, I've seen Jane Campbell on TV many times. Lately it's been because of catastrophes and crises, but I know that she's done a tremendous job providing confidence to the leadership of her community. Jane Campbell is the mayor of a great city, Cleveland, Ohio. She began her career as an elected official in the Ohio House of Representatives. She was elected Cuyahoga County Commissioner. And in November 2001, she was elected the 55th mayor of the city of Cleveland. Like many a great leader, she attended... Oops, sorry. I was about to say, like many of a great leader, Jane, you attended your parents' alma mater and mine, the University of Michigan, which must make it difficult for you at the great football game that's going to be fought this Saturday between 2 great teams, Ohio State and Michigan. Who are you rooting for in that game? We have a sound problem. She must have said Ohio State, that's why. You know.
Hear me now?
Oh, Fran Ulmer, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you very much. Now can you hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Okay,
yes.
I said who were you rooting for in the football game this Saturday?
I always root for my alma mater.
Okay, all right. Well, anyway, we're delighted to have you here. I'm sorry I didn't introduce Fran Ulmer by name. It's because I'm so familiar with her that I forgot.
You might explain why.
Why is that?
I'm an IOP fellow at this
Okay,
school.
she's also a fellow as well. That's why we did it. Let me start out I want to ask this question of everybody. I'm going to start with Jane Campbell, if I might, because she's had to deal with this electric grid problem, the blackout issue, and I don't know if that was it, but if you had to describe the defining crisis in your career as mayor, what was it, and then how did you deal with it successfully, and how?
Mr. Secretary, and I'm here by video conference as opposed to with you directly, is because I'm now dealing with our biggest problem, which is a budget deficit. We have approximately a $60 million deficit for 2004. In order to balance, we have to deal with the layoffs now. And so we are in the difficult negotiations with our public safety forces and all of our basic services. And actually, I've been at City Hall until late in the evening every day this week because we have to be ready the 1st of December. Before that, when I accepted this assignment, it was really the blackout, where we had a situation where we had no power, and we learned that when you have no power, you can't make the water go uphill. And so we had no water either. And we really spent 24 hours with no power anywhere, and ultimately we spent the entire weekend sorting through getting power and water back in our community.
And did you feel you handled that successfully? The best you could under the circumstances?
Let me tell you how we managed that circumstance, because I think there are some lessons for all of us. It began at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And first thing we knew was that there was no power. And it took probably half an hour until we knew that it wasn't just that there was no power in Cleveland, that there was no power in the northeast part of the United States, extending all the way to the Midwest. So what we had an emergency plan, and I will tell you that having an emergency plan was critical, because I landed in Cleveland Hopkins at 4:30, which is our airport. So I landed really about half an hour after the crisis started. And when I landed at the airport, we were told, there was a power problem and we couldn't get off the plane immediately. And people did what they normally would. They say, you're the mayor, can't get us off this plane. And I was on the plane with my finance director, my law director, and the airport director, because we'd just been to visit Continental, which is our hub carrier. And so we all got on the cell phone. I called City Hall, and my chief of staff said, "Where are you?" And I said, "At the airport." She said, "What airport?" I said, "Cleveland Hopkins." And she said, "Oh, thank goodness. Get down here immediately." And at that point, she told me that nobody had power. And so I said to the airport director, "Get us out of this plane." And so they brought her, we got out of the plane, we jumped in a police car, went down to City Hall. But we had by that point already convened everyone in the Red Room. Our police chief had been in touch with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, so we knew it wasn't a terrorist activity, which of course was everybody's first concern. And we were beginning to understand the operational issues. And we then realized City Hall's backup power system failed almost immediately. And so we had to move to our secondary location, which was down the street. We did, and we established an emergency operations center. And so one of the consequences was that the utilities department was our backup emergency operations center, but we had a utilities emergency. So the citywide emergency center displaced the utilities folks, and so they had to work at finding a location. And what we realized was that there was an enormous amount of panic on the part of the public. And so we made an agreement with the media that we would provide press briefing once an hour. And I'll tell you what, I learned more about the operations of the water system, of our Cleveland Public Power system, and about our private investor-owned utility system, because every hour I made them go through every detail about what they knew so that I could explain it to the public.
That's a good lesson. Martin, how would you describe your defining crisis or major problem that you've faced with so far?
The critical word there is so far. Early on in my administration, we had an experience with a tremendous fire in a tunnel that ran underneath the city of Baltimore. This happened in roughly, I think, the summer of 2001. And I was on a trip on the Eastern Shore, and I was talking to my able deputy mayor, and he said, "We had a bit of a train wreck here today." And I said, "Yeah, they messed up the library press conference, right?" He said, "No, it's not about the closing of libraries. It's a literal train wreck." I said, "Where?" And he said, it's in a tunnel underneath our city. Well, I had no idea, but it was about a mile-long tunnel, and in the middle of this, a chemical car had, for some reason, as yet undetermined by the railroad administrator people, had for some reason derailed and combusted. Try to use my words carefully. And we literally had what in essence was a fire going on in a long brick oven with only one entrance in the front and one entrance in the back, and a whole lot of other nasty chemicals underneath there with varying names and degrees of potential damage to the public. And it happened at about 4 o'clock on a weekday, right between a doubleheader at Camden Yards. So smoke was billowing out, and we had to evacuate Camden Yards. The warning sirens, the air raid sirens, which we still do on a monthly basis to make sure they're working, started cranking out. People started evacuating the city. We started closing down places. After a while, the fire cooked a very old water main. In cities, we have very old water mains, and that kind of turned one of our main intersections where the light rail and everything else goes into a whitewater rapids, which added another complication and shut down water to the center of our city. But that was sort of my first crash course in this. And I think one of the things that Jane mentioned that's so critically important for any mayor in a time of crisis is to make sure that you communicate regularly, to tell your people what you know, and absolutely only what you know, not what you hope to know, not what you think might have happened. Tell your people what you know and only what you know. Tell them what you're doing about it, and thirdly, what they should be doing, whether that is to stay out of the city, to plan on not coming to work tomorrow if you're in a certain area of the city. And as Jane did with the blackout in the city of Baltimore, when we had this experience, I made sure, whether I wanted to or not, we went out and did the media briefings. And it might not have been a whole lot of more information than they had an hour before, but if you don't feed them and tell them what's going on, they'll go find the bad things that aren't happening, or maybe the bad things that are. And so that was sort of my first defining moment, trying to keep answers short.
Great. Fran?
I think the biggest challenge that Alaska has faced in terms of an emergency in the last 20 years was the Exxon Valdez oil spill in March of 1989. Although I was not a mayor at that time, I was served in the legislature. I was on the legislative committee that was assigned the responsibility of working with the mayors to try to respond to that crisis. When 11 million gallons of crude oil spills in Prince William Sound, let me just tell you, it really ruins your day. It was like a death in the family. It really was, because not only did we immediately have the pictures of the dying wildlife and birds, but the communities that rim Prince William Sound, whether it's Kodiak or Valdez or Kenai, are fishing communities, and fishing communities that rely upon the health of the salmon and the well-being of the ecosystem. So it was clear immediately that not only would it be a tremendous challenge to clean up the oil, but then there would be long and lingering challenges in terms of the economic impact to these communities. So we spent quite a bit of time over a number of months and years working together as a team, mayors, legislators, federal agencies, state agencies, the private sector, the oil industry, not only responding to the oil cleanup in terms of trying to clean up the disaster, but trying to clean up the economic and social and cultural impacts associated with it. What's the lesson learned? Clearly, the best lesson is to prevent a disaster from happening. The second best thing is to prepare for a disaster so that you know at the community level, at the state level, what you can do in terms of being able to respond to the crisis at hand. That means having a disaster plan, and I think every mayor ought to check out their own disaster plan. If you have one, update it. If you don't have one, build one. Because it's not just the plan that you need, it's the process of identifying the resources that you have at the community level to be able to handle whatever comes your way. That's what happens in the planning process. It's the assessment, it's the communication, it's the team building. That planning process, whether you're talking about an oil spill or a fire or an earthquake or a hurricane or whatever may come your way, you can be prepared. And although it won't make everything okay, it will certainly empower your community to respond in a positive way.
Wellington?
I think the first part is in defining the question is what is meant by crisis. And to me is that most mayors do the normal activities very well. The crisis becomes in those events that take place that you have no control over and that were totally unexpected. Let me share with you the parameters of my first term. You come into office in 1991. You have a $4 billion airport to build from the ground up. It's 10% built. You have a lease with only one airline. That airline is in bankruptcy. You have a third of the population that's for the project, a third of the population that's opposed to the project, and the other third is marginally supportive in hopes that you can demonstrate their voting for it was a good idea. During the midst of the first 9 months, the aviation director resigns and moves to another locale. The deputy manager of public works, who was in charge with managing the public works operation, dies of AIDS. And 2 months later, the construction manager, the manager of public works, dies of a brain tumor, who was the one doing the actual building. And then there's you. And so what the unexpected obviously were the 2 deaths of our 2 top people. They were doing a project which the city's financial wherewithal was tied to its future. And I think 2 things that both these 3 mayors have said is very important. One is to convey what you know. 2 is to remember who you are. You're the mayor. People look to you. People look for reassurances from you. People want to see you in front of the camera. People want to see you in a leadership capacity and in charge. And it's also important that you have to manage the activities that are going on around you. And that doesn't mean to suggest and to say what you don't know or to hypothesize on what took place, but it is to give a constant daily information to the public, to reassure the public that your leadership that they've put you in by virtue of electing you as mayor, that you can lead them through this this crisis of whether it's limited in scope or whether it's short term or whether it's long term, and then to make the management changes or the intuitive changes that you think are necessary to bring about a successful conclusion. To me, managing the unforeseen and the unprepared for activities that take place also determines your ability to manage.
I want to ask another question of all 4 of you, and it relates to your relationships with the federal government. There's a lot of responsibilities being put on you, particularly in the Homeland Security area. If you were to have the president before you, or the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader of the Senate, or all of the above, what is it you would tell them that you would want them to not do, and what was it that you tell them you'd want them to do? I mean, what's the biggest problem and the biggest opportunity in terms of relationships with the national government? Jane, I'll start with you.
But I would say, look, you understand that the real areas where there are challenges in terms of Homeland Security are big cities. Give the money to manage the crisis directly to the big cities. I will tell you for a fact, when we had the blackout, I'm the mayor of the city of Cleveland, but the entire region looked to me. What's going on? What do we do? Where are we? And we manage, now we do run the water system. That's the 10th largest water system in the country. But people were saying to me, tell me, Mayor, what's going on? Is it a terrorist situation? What should we do for our personal safety? And we had to do that. We had an earlier situation where we had a sniper in an occupied building at Case Western Reserve University. We have a large university. Matter of fact, we have 2. We have the football stadiums, the baseball stadium. I would say to the federal government, forget about this crazy system that you have where you have public relations announcements that money's being given to Cleveland or some other city for Homeland Security, and you're not really giving it to us. You're giving it to the state, who's going to give it to the county, and at every level of government on the way to the city, money gets skimmed off, and we don't have it for really dealing with the consequences in our police department, in our fire department, and in our emergency medical system.
Thank you. Martin?
I couldn't have said it better myself. It is absolutely crazy. You know, these guys, they always talk about how our first responders, our fire and police officers need the support they need, and yet they send every dollar to the secondary responders. I mean, the result of that is that our state emergency management agencies are going to be able to rush water to us and bury us much more quickly than they would have before September 11th. But it also means that Your fire and police departments are not getting the funding that they need. Your mayors are the ones who are in command in a crisis like that. I mean, it was Mayor Giuliani when September 11th hit. And second to that, and similar to that, is that the federal government has yet really to do a vulnerability assessment. Every mayor in every major city has done a vulnerability assessment. We all know where our rail lines are. We know where the chemical facilities are. And yet the federal government is still obsessed with this notion of sending dollars only to the state capitals. The result being that we have the most fortified state capitals in the world, in the free world, and yet when the state capitals turn around to divide up the money, they do it on a per capita formula based on where the voters lay down their heads at night, not based on where the rail lines, the tunnels, the critical infrastructure, the density of population. They do it according to where the voters live. And folks, that's not where the vulnerabilities are. And it's been very, very difficult for many of us as mayors trying to support our police and fire departments to get them, A, the resources they need, and B, when the resources start to come our way, we have to arm wrestle with the state government that has also not completed a vulnerability assessment. So here we are trying to talk about vulnerabilities and where our strategic assets and density of populations are with a state government that hasn't bothered to do one, with a federal government that hasn't bothered to do one, and as Jane said, was skimming off at every level of the bureaucracy on its way down to us.
So to date, you would not give a very good grade then to the legislation, the department itself, or the process by which they're trying to protect America?
No, I would not at all. I think that the amount of dollars that have come from the federal government, I mean, if we're truly fighting a war on two fronts, right? If we're truly fighting a war on two fronts, I mean, there's nowhere near the sort of assets committed by Congress to defend the homeland. What they've started to do on airline security is great, but what about the ports? We're still only inspecting about 5 or 6% of the cargo that's coming into our country on containers. I mean, what about our rail yards? If the graffiti vandals can get on those chemical cars pretty readily, you know, how much easier could Al-Qaeda get onto those tracks? So no, we have a failing grade in terms of the amount of dollars that are coming our way, and it's also a very disjointed, and I have yet to have anybody explain to me reasonably why dollars for first responders are going exclusively to the secondary response agencies at the state level. It makes absolutely no sense.
Fran?
Well, Dan, if I had to say just one area, just being really precise about the one area the federal government could help communities the most, and also help states, I might add, it is in the area of emergency communications. Emergency communications are a huge problem, and I don't care what jurisdiction you're in, because police and fire and military and National Guard and state agencies are often on different frequencies. Many of you have had this problem. We had a big forest fire outside of Anchorage, you know, and it was one of those situations where you had fire personnel, police personnel, state, federal, local, they were all there, but they couldn't talk to each other because all their radio systems are different. This is an area where the federal government is trying to take leadership in terms of setting standards, but they are not providing the necessary financial support to the necessary entities, both at the state and local level, to be able to actually make good on the promise. And obviously, in time of crisis, if you can't communicate, it's really hard to deploy your assets.
Thank you. Wellington?
I like to look at the question a different way in terms of looking at it from attitudes. I think of the government in this way. And some of the older mayors have been around, have heard me say this before. I think of the Congress like the Air Force. They fly at a very high altitude. They pass a lot of laws. And we can call them unfunded mandates or a lot of other things. And they just drop these things on us, not knowing what happens after they pass them when they hit the ground. I think of governors as the Navy. They're more concerned with territorial boundaries and what they're doing outside their territory as they have their ships at sea to protect what goes on in their state and keep anyone else from coming in. And then there's the mayors. Now, I see the mayors as the grunts. That's the infantry. That's the ones that run the cities, administer the government, hold the terrain, assure that people are safe. and that it takes a coordinated effort between the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army. But those of us that have had most of the direct contact are spoken to last in terms of communication, in terms of planning. I don't think any of these systems are absolute, but I think it's about an attitude problem of a federal official asking the question, before I do this, what is it going to do to this person that has to implement it? And many times they don't do that. They make and pass legislation without talking to anybody. And I'm saying that we need to be about making sure that those at the federal level and at the state level talk to those of us that have to implement much of what they're suggesting at the federal and state level.
I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I would like you all to feel free to go to the mics. This is a slightly different subject, but if cities are criticized for anything, the one thing it seems to me they're most criticized for is something that you may not have under your control, and that's schools. And I don't know in your respective cities who runs the school districts. But a lot of the future and the livelihood and the viability of our nation's cities, regardless of what size, depends upon the quality of the schools. And a lot of the large urban school districts have just continued to have a lot of difficulty. And there have been a lot of proposals out there, some very controversial, charter schools, privatization, aid to parochial schools. And some cities, the mayor runs a city school system, like in the city of Chicago. I don't know how it is in your respective cities, but if you had to give some ideas about how you could make your schools better in the communities that you are, what suggestions would you have? I'll start with you, Jane.
Mr. Secretary, I am in charge of the schools.
You are, good.
In the city of Cleveland, the mayor appoints the school board, and for our 75,000 children who are in the Cleveland Public Schools, it is ultimately my responsibility to make sure that they get an education. This was started as an experiment about 5 years, actually 5 years ago. We just celebrated 5 years. The state legislature authorized the mayor, the prior mayor, to appoint a school board, and it was a 3-year experiment that we then had to go to the voters and ask them if they would reaffirm mayoral control. They did, because it made a difference. In our circumstance, 5 years ago, 25% of our kids graduated. Only 80% of our kids came to school. On any given day, there were like 15, 20% of the kids who were just simply not at school. Safety was an enormous problem, and there was really very little hope. Now we have met the attendance targets for the state. 95% of our kids come to school. Our graduation rate is up to 38%. I'm not going to be happy till it's 99%, but we're moving in the right direction. For the first time, we moved out of academic emergency, which is one of the things that our state measures, the very first time. And today we were able to announce that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is giving us $2 million to do a transformation of our high schools from the big high schools to a smaller learning centers. So in my case, I'm in charge. It's hard to be in charge, and it means that you have to have a fabulous superintendent, support the superintendent, and then deal with the resource question.
Martin?
Yeah, for better or worse, our school system is now jointly run as of 1998 by the state and also by the city. Prior to that, we had been exclusively, our school system was run by the mayor. The mayor appointed the board of school commissioners, confirmed by the city council, and also chose the CEO. Now the board approved or chosen jointly by the mayor and the governor, then hired the CEO. I say fortunately and unfortunately because we moved from being the 16th worst funded jurisdiction in our state, which has 24 jurisdictions, to now being the second best funded school system on a per capita basis, as the state agreed with this relinquishing of some local control to put more money into our school system. Our first and second graders scored above the national average in reading and math last year for the first time in 30 years, and every grade has seen improvement over the last 4 years, every single grade in their reading and math scores. Having said that, while we've also been lucky to receive an investment from the Gates Foundation, we also have discovered a big deficit on the business side of the house. Just because you make a system more independent You may make it a little more free of the failed patronage politics of the past, but it doesn't mean that you've brought about that sort of performance measurement that every public institution needs these days. So it's still a work in progress. If I had any advice to give school systems, it is to set expectations high and demand the same sort of accountability from your school administrators that any business people would demand from somebody running a big business enterprise.
I would just ask both of you, Jane and Martin. Recently there was a story about the mayor of Detroit who was having great difficulty making changes in the system because of let's say, the power and inflexibility of entrenched interests in that school system, including teachers' unions and associations. Do you think you have enough flexibility to deal with some of the historic problems or roadblocks? Again, I'm not putting them on necessarily the teachers' unions, but there are a lot of folks who feel that the status quo keeps the schools from really ever improving dramatically. Let's start with Jane on that, and I'll go down.
Secretary, there's no question that we have a lot of entrenched bureaucracy, but we are moving through it and we are making changes. And part of what happened is when mayoral control went into effect, the teachers' union was dead set against it, completely dead set against it. But the prior mayor hired a terrific superintendent who came in knowing that the union was really looking not to be happy with her, and she sat down and worked with them, and they have worked hand in glove. Now we're at a very important crossroads because the individual who's been the president of the union during these 5 years is getting ready to retire. So we're going to have a new personality. And a lot of this really is about relationships. And so we have to work through that with a new person. We are in the process of rebuilding all our schools. We have 122 schools. It's a $1 billion construction project as we rebuild, in some cases build new schools. And what we're now trying to work through is some of the entrenched problems that there are with things like the custodial union. Because if we're going to spend $1 billion to build fabulous facilities, I don't want those facilities closing at 3:30. They ought to stay open, and so that we can use them for after-school programs, that we can use them for training programs for the parents. We can use them as community centers like schools ought to be. And that will take some negotiation, but I believe we can get it done.
Martin?
Yeah, your question, Mr. Secretary, was do we have enough flexibility? Do we have enough power to get through the entrenched interests? On the academic side of the house, and I'm just speaking from my own experience in the city of Baltimore, we made a lot of progress, and we did it with a lot of people working collaboratively together. The one difficult piece that we never attacked was a lot of the overstaffing in the central administration. And now with a new CEO and some new leadership, our school board serves on staggered terms, so I only recently got majority control of the school board. We've now been able to go in and kind of open that up. And in this crisis, the crisis is giving us, I suppose, all the flexibility we need, if you want to call it flexibility. I mean, we have no choice. If we don't lay off 1,000 people by January, all the other paychecks for the teachers and the principals are going to start bouncing by March. So, we have a crisis that's forced us to overcome the inertia on the administrative side.
Fran?
Dan, I think there are 3 things that we could do to improve education in America. And I say this not only as a former mayor and legislator and lieutenant governor, but also as the parent of a high school teacher. Number 1, I think we have to change the No Child Left Behind Act. I think it's incredibly inflexible, and particularly when it comes to rural America, but even in urban America, it had a noble goal, but it kind of misses the mark. And not to mention that the federal government didn't bother to fund it. And talk about unfunded mandates when it comes to something as big ticket an item as education, I think it's irresponsible. So No Child Left Behind Act needs amendment, and it needs to be funded. Number 2, I think Americans need to do something that they haven't done in a really long time, and that is remind themselves that what happens in terms of quality of education happens in the classroom. It's the magic of the teacher. And we're losing teachers, ladies and gentlemen. We're losing them because they're under stress, they're underpaid, they're underappreciated. It's a hard job. and people are realizing that they can do something else, you know? So we need to appreciate our teachers, and unless we give them respect and appreciation, I think we're going to really continue to have a serious problem in this country. And the third thing I think we need to do to improve education, and we did this when I was mayor, we involved the community in the schools, and that means business leaders, it means government leaders, it doesn't just mean teachers and parents, although clearly that's important. Making certain that the community as a whole feels involved in and ownership of the schools is how we build stronger schools in America. And the mayor can lead and make that happen.
Wellington?
I agree with the first part of the hypothesis, that I think there is no question that mayors are being held more accountable for what goes on in schools, whether they have control over them or not. And I think that there are hot spots where mayors come in contact with schools. If you look at where the police calls come from, if they come from schools where there's you have to have a police presence inside the school, outside the school, football stadiums, football games, activity games on weekends, police officers from certain districts. Some principals are more apt to call police than other principals. There is a relationship, crossing guards, school safety, traffic. There's a relationship between what goes on within schools and what goes on with the city. I think it's also important that mayors want to have a well-read, well-educated workforce that's going to graduate from high schools, that's going to be integrated into the workforce of that city. I don't necessarily agree, though, that all mayors have to operate the schools. But I believe that there needs to be a relationship tied together where the school board, school superintendent are tied together with the mayor that's providing support, as my successor has, on whether it's school bond issues or whether it's after-school recreation or clubs, or many of the activities that also are part of education that allows the school district to focus more on curriculum and coursework, and someone else provide that support for some of the activities that normally get cut, that kept some of us in school, whether it was music, art, sports, or whatever. Those things tend to get cut, and I think those are things that need to be included. But I do believe that mayors and business community need to be concerned about the quality of the education that the students receive in the school districts in the cities that you administer. And you will get called on it. But I also believe that in Western states, there's clearly a delineation of school districts are independently elected. In the East, there's more of a predominance of mayors running school districts. And I'm just suggesting, whatever the structure is, you need to be involved in it in terms of caring about what happens to these kids. Because whether you want to care or not, you will politically be called on it at some point during your tenure as mayor. Take that from someone that's been out there a few terms.
We have a few minutes for questions, and we have mics on either side. I'd welcome your opportunity to participate. Start here, then we'll go to the new mayor of Tallahassee.
Correct.
Okay, but we'll start right here with this young lady.
Head Start, after-school programs, small learning communities, dropout prevention. There are almost 45 programs and $1.5 billion in programming from the U.S. Department of Education bill. That's likely to be cut when the bill goes through Congress, when the appropriation bill goes through. Is there enough overlap in the passion of mayors to make specific suggestions about what must be kept in?
Anybody want to take that?
Well, I would say, one, the answer to that is yes. Number two, in Denver, we applied to manage the Head Start program, and we didn't have it before, and Health and Human Services split it, where Denver is one of the grantees, along with Operation SARE. Not only is there a concern about funding, I think there's also a concern about the present direction of the Department of Education in changing the standards of the teachers and the staff that work in Head Start without giving them the necessary tools in terms of all of their teachers being able to be degreed and all the parents having certain academic criteria. But I think Head Start has been a successful program. I think it works, and I think that I don't think it also can just be mayors. I think it has to be mayors and legislators. I think it has to be friends and supporters of Head Start have to fight for this. I mean, mayors can be part of that, but I don't think they can be the only ones who can be a part of that.
Anybody else want to comment on the question? Okay. Our new mayor from Tallahassee, Florida.
Yeah, thank you very much. Arts, culture. What's the significance of arts and culture on your economic development of your community? And what role should government and the private sector play in the development and utilizing arts and culture in your community?
Can I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
I had the good fortune to see a gentleman named Richard Florida from Carnegie Mellon speak recently. He's written a best-selling book called The Rise of the Creative Class. And he makes a very compelling argument in that book that America's economy is being increasingly fueled by a burgeoning and growing creative class, which he defines broadly as not only your traditional sort of artists and musicians and actors, but also people who are teachers, researchers, doctors, engineers, architects, and what he identifies as the sort of things that artists in the creative class look for, and he examined cities that had done it successfully, had put together the amenities in terms of the 24/7 street life in city centers instead of the sort of ghost towns that we all built these big skyscrapers, but people would empty out and your downtown would be empty once 5 p.m. rolled around. So he talks about amenities like that streetscape, like the active music life, connecting your parks and the bike trails and all of the things that a lot of your better cities are doing. So we are grappling with that now as a city. And as you listen to Mr. Florida, as you read his book, you'll say to yourself, well, we do that well. Well, we've got that going for us. And he also talks about the power of a research university as a tremendous anchor, as an essential ingredient of that. So we're increasingly doing more and more of that in the city of Baltimore. We have great cultural institutions, but we're trying to break out of the mindset of thinking about it narrowly as the Walters, the BMA, however great they are, the symphony orchestra, the opera house. I mean, it is a much bigger movement than that, and we need to do a better job of leveraging all of the various dollars we spend on creating an environment with the amenities that attract that creative class.
Jane, you want to comment
Can
on
I
this
say
culture?
something?
Yes.
Absolutely. In Cleveland, art and culture is one of the things that we have that's absolutely world class, from the Museum of Art, the Cleveland Orchestra, and
You didn't mention the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Engage with Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
all right.
And we take those things and use them as economic development tools. For example, when the orchestra goes on tour, we try to get some of our business community to go with them and engage with the businesses that might be investing in Cleveland. We also look at art and culture as an opportunity to revitalize neighborhoods. We have one neighborhood in the near west side, the Detroit Shoreway neighborhood, that was really a neighborhood in a great deal of distress. And what's happened is that a very experimental small theater took over an old building, and they have been investing. Now there's another theater. There are a couple of art galleries. And so what you have is, because it's relatively inexpensive, because it's been a distressed neighborhood, all of a sudden you've got vitality and life and engagement that is a whole brand new thing that is creating a real partnership with some of the people who've lived in that neighborhood forever. And so you have in this neighborhood, you've got the little old Italian ladies going, oh, aren't these hippies wonderful? Because they've brought vitality. And it's really kind of fun to watch that really see the investment of bricks and mortar and imagination come together in a very creative new way.
Want to comment, either one of you?
Just really briefly, obviously tourism is a big part of many communities' economy. You want that culture and art vitality both for your residents and for your visitors, because more and more, I mean, even we have a lot of visitors, of course, in Alaska who just come for the mountains and the fishing and all of those things, but they want to know the culture. They want to know about Alaska Tlingit Indian culture. They want to see the dances. They want to understand it. And I think that that is an increasingly important role that communities can play in brokering these partnerships that strengthen the community both for residents and for visitors. It is a big economic development as well as quality of life issue.
I think it's an integral part of your city. And the other part that people forget, artists sell products, they pay taxes, they pay rent, they buy cars, they buy houses. It's an employee base. And, you know, all the people who are going to Paris aren't just going there to, I mean, you know, there's a lot of art there. I mean, a lot of these great cities around the world are there that people are going because of the art and culture of those particular cities. And I just think it's an integral part of our communities.
Yes, sir, up there.
This is a question for Mayor O'Malley, but I think the themes might be pertinent to the experiences of other cities as well. And excuse my lack of specifics because I'm recalling an article that I read a while ago. But in your city, there was a woman that was taking an active role in informing the police department about the activities of drug dealers in her neighborhood, and she took great concern in that. And the police were also aware of the threats made against her because of her active role in her neighborhood. And in retaliation, the drug dealers, I believe, killed her and her children. What steps have you taken?
And her husband.
And her husband. Then what steps has your administration taken to, I guess, build trust between the police and the community? Because as I read, I believe there's a lot of trust lost between the police department as well as the community.
Actually, the degree of trust and confidence between police and community actually increased after that horrible event. And it was an unspeakably, unfathomably tragic incident. Entire family, mom, dad, 5 little kids, firebombed in their sleep by a drug dealer, minor league drug dealer, who was giving them a hard time and hanging on the corner. In that district, there was a lot of national attention on us at the time because there was a lot of fear that that would break our resolve as a people to combat the foreign chemical attacks of cocaine and heroin, which murdered 6,000 of my neighbors in the 90s, twice the number that died in the Pentagon and World Trade Center attacks. But rather than breaking the back of our resolve, it strengthened us. And that little house became our Alamo. And in that eastern district, they achieved about a 30% reduction in violent crime in the years since that horrible attack. We were named the most addicted city in America from 1994 to 1999 by the DEA, which now says we've led all of the top 20 cities in America with the exception of Dallas in the rate of reduction of drug-related emergency room admissions. We have had the biggest decrease in violent crime of any of America's top 20 cities in the last 4 years. And we have done all of this with fewer police-involved shootings and fewer discourtesy and fewer brutality complaints, even with a more active police department and 200 additional officers. So when folks came from out of town and looked at that incident, they tried to understand it in a way that was really not current with where we are as a people. And we continue, in addition to that family of 7, we've buried 7 officers who gave their lives in the line of duty. Some of them were black, some of them were white. Most all of them also had little kids that they left behind. So this has been a difficult struggle each and every day, but we continue to create open and transparent systems for deploying our police. We've probably disciplined, arrested, and fired more police officers in the last 4 years than in the prior 14. And I continue to make good on the pledge that I'll do everything in my power, and I ask my people to do everything in theirs. And they're courageous and resilient people, and we're not going to give up.
Thank you. Yes, sir, right here.
Good evening. My name is Brian Blue. I'm a first-year student in the public policy program. One of the things that I think is extremely important in any city is a community building, and I think it falls on the shoulders of the mayors. If I could hear some views on what you've done to approach community building and a sense of community in your cities, what's been effective, what's worked for you, but also the challenges you faced when approaching those problems.
Wellington, you want to start, or you?
Well, I think procedurally what we've done is everything we do, we try to bring community involved in it, because if you don't have community involved in it, the community is going to be involved in some part in the process. They're either going to show up at council meetings to oppose the initiative that you're taking place. Matter of fact, I did one bond issue for $100 million, and I gave 100, and I told the neighborhoods, they select their leadership. I'm going to put a bond issue out for $100 million, and they can determine what the bond issue is going to be in terms of neighborhood improvements without me changing any of it, and also agreement with the council. That for them was very difficult, because normally they're asking us to determine where they make a lot of requests and then say, will you pare the list down? We did the reverse. We said, we're going to give you the amount of money and that you do that. The other thing is that I think it's also important that the community have access to their elected officials, so that they don't ever feel like they're squeezed out, or that they have to have an appointment with either a lobbyist or someone else. And so I would do a specific time where anyone could come and meet the mayor for a specific time period. Right after work, without appointment, they line up outside the office and they come, everybody gets 10 minutes. So if they have a serious problem, if they want to talk about the family, if they want to talk about job discrimination, they want to talk about helping getting a job, or if they're homeless. And the goal is to make people feel a part of the empowerment of their community.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't terribly creative, but I appointed a lot of advisory committees, and I gave them focused work to do and really worked with them to make sure that their recommendations came to fruition. It's as they say, not rocket science, but if you ask people to help, they want to help. But you have to be able to channel that energy in a way that actually means that you can achieve what it is that you've asked them to do. My community had gone through a terribly divisive vote to move the capital. There probably aren't a lot of communities that have had that problem, but Juneau, the capital city of Alaska, you cannot drive there. It's the only capital in America that you have to either take a plane to or take a boat to, and this has been a big issue, to move the capital up north where more of the people live. Well, we just fought that battle. I actually fought it a number of times, but when I came in as mayor, we'd won the battle. We were keeping Juneau the capital, but I knew that it would come around again. So I created a number of committees, the Blue and Gold Citizens Committee, to try to make our capital the best it could be. And they did a lot of different things. They focused on beautification, on creating space where visiting mayors could actually have a free place to make phone calls and do faxes and all that kind of thing. I mean, lots of ideas. But they actually made recommendations that we implemented. And it creates a tremendous sense of trust when a leader at any level actually asks people to participate and then takes their advice and implements them. It makes community building from that point forward a lot easier.
Any comments, Martin?
Yeah,
Jane,
I want to refer you to our Baltimore City website, www.baltimorecity.gov. And to,
You ever said that before?
Yeah, a few times.
Okay, all right.
Baltimore was recently invited by Tony Blair to come to England, and because they launched a civic engagement campaign that they call the Together campaign, that they readily admit they were inspired by Baltimore's Believe campaign. And the Believe campaign was in essence a campaign we ran after a year of accomplishments against crime, against murder. We were always plus 300 our first year. We reduced murders down to 260 from the 320 the year before. And having established a little bit of credibility, the government was doing its part. We ran ads which portrayed Baltimore in a very graphic, honest, and painful way as seen through the eyes of a 12-year-old African-American boy who would become the metaphor for our city's future. And as the ad ended, tragically, with his little sister dead on the pavement, caught in a gunfire with her tightly braided hair and her lifeless eyes wide open on the pavement, and faces of Baltimore people, white and black, civilian and police, standing around her, the announcer said, "There's some who say give up. It's over. We've lost. But for the strong, for the brave, this fight is not over. What will it take to make us stand together and say enough?" And then the ad showed the boy's eyes just staring at you silently, asking you as an individual, what you were going to do to change the situation. And then as the music came up, it said, believe in us, believe in yourself, Baltimore, believe. And we ran those ads for 3 very painful weeks, fessed up to the failing that we would allow a homicide rate like that to continue for 10 or 15 years, so long as the victims were young and poor and black, when we would never allow it if they were young and poor and white. And we faced up to our failings. And we pledged, as the people that Frederick Douglass and Johnny Unitas loved, that we did believe enough in ourselves and one another to step up. We ran ads that had calls to action: mentor a child, get someone you love into drug treatment, join the police department, implicitly support the police department. And we continue to run that today, and it's become organic. And at the horrible incident that gentleman mentioned, when all the national cameras showed up for an ugly scene, when we had the prayer vigil outside the Dawson's house, people were there with homemade signs on the back of paper, shopping bags that said the Dawsons believed. We believe. And that's what we've done.
Jane, do you have any comments?
I certainly think Mayor O'Malley sets the stage on a much broader engagement of the media. But perhaps I can talk about what we've done that is perhaps of a smaller scale, but nevertheless just as important. We also took a tragedy and have tried to turn it into an opportunity for full community engagement. We had an 11-year-old child who was reported missing, and we spent a very difficult 1 month looking for that little girl. She was an 11-year-old African-American child, and her mother couldn't find her. She'd been to a block party. And you think a block party is a community engagement. It's an opportunity. Everybody comes together. Everybody's comfortable. And for a month, we searched, and what we did is we engaged the community in the search. So the police did their search, but we also worked with community activists to follow up and deal with that search. And it wasn't always an easy process, let me tell you, but we worked at it. Ultimately, we found, her name was Shakira Johnson. We found her body. She had been murdered, and the coroner said that she had probably been murdered within hours of when she was first taken. And it began an entire discussion that really is still going on, that's community-wide, about how do we protect our children, how do we provide assistance for parents who are trying to take care of their children, how do we help make sure children know how to walk safely to school, really engage in activities that are good quality after-school activities that give people an opportunity to come together and do something positive. And on Shakira's behalf, we continue to mobilize our community around coming together, both the public sector and the private sector.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, because I know that a couple of mayors have to leave, and I think you were the next one standing. So
thank you. You talked a lot about the success stories that you've had during leading in times of crisis, and it's important to learn from the misfortunes that, as well as the successes. And I was wondering, can you comment on your observations of other people during leading in times of crisis that were unsuccessful and the impact that they had on their city or community? And what did they do wrong?
Well, not to name names, because I think what you're really looking for is sort of what's the common denominator between success versus failure in a crisis environment. And obviously, as I said before, I think being prepared to the extent you can be prepared positions you better, in communities, mayors, states, countries that aren't prepared, haven't gone through the self-assessment process and really analyzing whether or not you have the tools you need to be able to respond, puts you in a very weak position to be able to lead. But I'd just say in closing, I think it's very important for mayors or for any other elected officials to have the confidence to lead, which means the confidence to make decisions, whether you're in crisis or kind of every single day. But you can't lead if no one is following. It's one of those rather simple principles, and so to be a good leader, you have to be a good communicator. Because unless your community or your state or your nation feels comfortable with the decisions you're making, it's going to be very hard to continue to amass the necessary support to carry forward those things that you've identified you need to do. So I think the failures that I've seen have been those when the leaders, even though they may have made good decisions, didn't really communicate adequately and build the necessary coalitions so that there would be followers that would be able to deliver on that leadership and be able to achieve those results for their communities.
Let me say it a little different from what's implied in your question. First of all, politics is a contact sport. No one is error-free. That's a misconception. Secondly, the only people that don't make mistakes and errors are the people that don't make decisions. The more decisions you make, the more likely you are to miss on one. The other issue is sometimes you don't know what you don't know at the time the event takes place. Let me give you an example. We're building an airport. We have 5 multinational corporations. We have one airline specifically, United, that wants a certain kind of baggage system, and they got all the experts in there. Not one of them had the proper program computers to operate the baggage system. Now, I'm the mayor. I would think that United would know that. I would think that the Bechtel would know that. I would think Hensel Phelps would know. I would think all these multinationals would know that. But no one knew that. No one knew it at the time. But because you're the mayor, then you're the one that has to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning or 5 a.m. to go on Good Morning America and explain what's going on with that process. Now, if there's something I learned during part of that process was people in Denver kid me because I never give a date anymore on anything. Because I would give this date that the staff gave me that we were going to open the airport, and then I would fudge it out some, knowing that it might be over optimistic so that I had some lead time. I don't give dates on anything anymore until we have soft opened it and then say we're going to open in 2 weeks. Because there are things that you don't have control over. You had 5,000 people working, 10,000 people working on a construction project. Some are better than others. And so are there things that you try to learn from other people's experiences? I think the answer to that is yes. I think you try to learn from other people's misfortunes. You also try to learn from other people's successes and replicate them so they fit your own geographic environment in your own culture of the city that you represent.
Any comments by Jane or Martin on this?
Jane? Back to you, Jane.
Anything?
Yeah. I think when you're looking for sort of an experience of failure, that a lot of times the experience of failure is, in public life, it's more not reaching the success you want. And that, if I can kind of use an example, we are in the process of trying to reclaim the lakefront in Cleveland. And if there's ever, we've got fabulous Lake Erie, all these opportunities. And so we've been working on building the consensus so you have the ability to lead because you've got people following, you've got people in line, you're putting together a plan that everybody can see and measure and take the next steps about where you're going. And then all of a sudden you get hit by another public official who decides, for reasons that really have nothing to do with the plan but have to do with various local political things, that they're going to throw a volley into the middle of it. And at that point, the hard part about leading is being able to respond to the unexpected crises, which are really manufactured crises. I mean, this is, in the grand scheme of things, this was a goofy thing, but it enamored the community for weeks. And I realized that while I had a plan and a community engagement, I hadn't incorporated as part of my plan the sniper fire that might come from my colleagues in political office. And that gave me something that I had to learn for the next time through.
The biggest, I think, as I was listening to my colleagues talk, I think one of the biggest mistakes people make in managing a crisis is to assume facts that you really have no rational reason to assume are true, and to try to look like you know more than you actually know. When you are the chief executive and everybody in the room and all their uniforms and the cameras and your public are all looking at you to do something and to know everything, it's really tempting to go out there on a limb. And I think you saw it in some of the things with the blackout. I think up the gentleman in Canada, who was it, the Prime Minister or somebody? I don't want to point any fingers. I like Canada. But that's really one of the dangers in a crisis. Don't assume you know something if you don't know it. And try not to, don't fill in the blank for people. If it's blank for you, you got to be honest with your public and tell them that you don't know these things yet. And you also have to try to develop, and part of this is instinct, that gut that a lot of us develop. So you know that, you know what, this is the time when I need to make a decision. I know A, I know B, I know C. I don't know D, I don't know E, and I don't know F, but I'm the human being that's charged to make a decision at this point that will have an impact either on my neighbor's safety or my neighbor's livelihoods, and I've got to make the call now. For example, in our tunnel fire, there came a point in the morning when I needed to make a call whether we were going to continue to close down our central business district for another day or not. And I had to make that call. I had to make it at 5 a.m. I made it with the best advice. But in the interest of trying to please people in the moment, I never compromised on safety. I never assumed facts that I didn't absolutely know. And I didn't try to rush, which is your inclination, to make it all right as soon as possible. And I think people that make mistakes make the mistake of falling into that natural human desire to make it all right and to make up facts that we really don't know.
Let me say this one last point too, because, and this is kind of a joke on myself. When I first was elected, I was 30, and I was elected to the state legislature. Sometimes legislators can have the ability to be more irresponsible in the fiery speeches they give at the mic. And I think back about all the police chiefs and mayors I wanted to fire and get rid of and organize and protest against. When you're the mayor, you're the one that have to implement. If you're the legislature, you don't have to implement. If you're the mayor, you're the one that has to implement what's going to happen, and you're the one in charge. If you're the governor or the lieutenant governor, you're the one in charge. There's a lot of difference between the executive branch, where the buck stops with you, as opposed to the other group that's making commentary before you have to do the implementation.
Well, we want to thank Mayor Campbell and Cleveland. We wish you well in your budget crisis. We would offer you some resources, but Mayor O'Malley has already marshaled those here. Mayor O'Malley, former Mayor Ulmer, former Mayor Webb. We thank you all for coming. Let's give them a hand for a great presentation. And Mayor Campbell, I don't think you can see us, can you? You can only hear us, right?
I can see you. I can see everybody standing up, getting ready to walk.
Yeah, all right. Anyway, have a good day. Thanks so much again.